actually about an article in today's Australian by Patricia Cavalis, which actually talks about the 99-year lease system which was instigated by the previous Prime Minister and the Member for Indigenous Affairs, Minister Brough. That the 99-year lease system was designed to give Aborigines the opportunity to buy and look after their own homes rather than return to the communal style, to communal title, the system under which all land is jointly owned by the local community or the land council. This indeed is a communist-style collective, and it is something that we do not impose on other Australians. We should not there, in equality and equity, impose it on our fellow Indigenous Australians. There is something dignified about being able to own one's home, and our Indigenous Australians have that right alongside non-Indigenous Australians. I strongly supported the measures by the previous Prime Minister in this regard, and I do commend the value of individual home ownership to the current Prime Minister. The condition and living standards of Australians in remote communities have challenged governments now for some decades. In more recent times, we've actually heard the stories of horror and violence against women and children in many of those remote communities, to the point that they live their lives in constant fear and hunger. And Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, back in 1998, I actually spoke on a report that was by Professor Bonnie Robinson from the Griffith University in Queensland, where she and a series or a panel of Indigenous women elders went and investigated the violence in remote Indigenous communities in North Queensland. And I was concerned at the time that for about 2 years after that report was handed up, it was met with silence. So, as they do say, nothing is quite as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I think the concept of now that we have to address the violence, neglect in remote Indigenous communities is right now before us. And indeed, many of these children and women who are subject to violence in these remote communities have experienced such neglect that has been induced by the unlimited alcohol and debased by pornographic material that's available in those communities. In a way, this was a result of further misguided good intentions of the government of the day, but also the debilitating, corrosive impact of welfare. And I note many of the comments that have been articulated by leaders of Indigenous communities today regarding how welfare kills softly. I commend again the previous Minister for Indigenous Affairs, the Honourable Mal Brough, as he then was, for his work in addressing this serious issue in many of our remote communities of Australia. But again, I agree with the current Prime Minister when he said the old approaches are not working. We need a new beginning that draws intelligently on the experiences of new policy settings across the nation. I would like to make a contribution to this new beginning, and it is appropriate that we do make a start with housing and also with the education of children, as he has indeed suggested. But this must be done in a culturally sensitive manner. At this point, I make the observation that the abused and neglected children are not just found in remote Indigenous communities, but also in non-Indigenous Australia. Indeed, it is a regular and genuine cause for wondering if we actually like children in our country anymore by constant news reports of abuse and violence against Australian children. Last year, most Australians were shocked and horrified to hear of a little girl who was starved to death, and only yesterday I was disturbed to hear news of 2 young children who died in mysterious circumstances in their home in a suburb close to Liverpool in my electorate. It is clear that the agencies of various governments have put in place for the protection of Australia. It is clear that the agencies that various Australian governments have put in place for the protection of Australian children are not working. It is impossible for a DOCS officer to live permanently in the homes of troubled families. If ever there was an urgent cause for a new beginning, it is certainly here in the protection of young Australians, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Imagine if we could provide safe accommodation for these children that included a structured learning environment where meals and supervised play were provided with care and a genuine commitment for their progress. Imagine if these centres had world-class facilities state-of-the-art classrooms and swimming pools, tennis courts, playing fields, fully equipped gyms, craft and music rooms. Well, why not, Mr Deputy Acting Speaker? And why could not these centres boast the very best teachers and special educators that money could buy? I could not only imagine such a place, but I actually know of such a place. It is Boys Town in my electorate at Engadine. Boys Town provides such a structured learning environment for boys who come from troubled families. The boys generally arrive on Sunday evenings and return to their homes on Friday evenings for the weekend. Such learning facilities like Boys Town could easily be provided across the nation by the federal government. We are wealthy enough to provide for our children. Its teachers could ideally be on rotation from the mainstream educational system of each state, with specialist teachers and educators appointed as required. Such centres could offer first-class facilities and maintain the highest educational standards. They would provide a real circuit breaker for a child existing in a neglected or traumatic circumstance who is identified as needing interim protection from a troubled family or community. However, the children would not be permanently separated from their parents or families or those communities because they would be able to return home on weekends or on a basis that is practical and suitable to each individual child. The children would be able to maintain, indeed be encouraged to maintain those vital links with culture, family and community. The provision of appropriate housing and education for children are only two areas of concern that require our immediate attention and action if we are to implement important actual indicators of our genuine expression of reconciliation. It will indeed be a new page in our shared history that will allow us to write a vision for a bright future together as fellow Australians, as one people. I wholeheartedly welcome and support this motion to say sorry, and I commend the motion to the House.